The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are going to take a deep dive into Kate Winthrop, the secret investigator who will be released in the Feast of Hemlock Vale Investigator expansion in January. This is my second crack at a Kate video. My previous attempt included an error, which we will discuss in this video. This is part 2 of my look at the Feast of Hemlock Vale Investigator expansion. Part 3, which will follow shortly, will take a look at the Survivor Investigator in the box, Hank Sampson. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before I get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. You all rock. If you'd like to be amazing like these people and support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Special thanks to Cole Monroe Chitty, Nicole Fiscus, and Nate Lost in Time and Space for their contributions to the channel. I couldn't do it without you. Without further ado, let's get started. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. In this video, we are going to take a closer look at Kate Winthrop, the secret investigator who will be released in the Feast of Hemlock Vale Investigator expansion in January. Designer Duke Harris unveiled the new investigator and campaign expansions during a live stream at Gen Con last week. And so we are making our way through the spoilers that were released. We do know all of the investigators who will be in the Investigator expansion box at this point, and we know most of their abilities. We've got Wilson Richards, the Guardian, who has 3s across the board. His abilities have to do with tool assets. He gets a cost reduction on tools and skill bonuses for using tools, and he can also, looks like he can swap tools in his hand with tools in his discard pile. We're going to talk a lot more about Kate Winthrop here in a moment. We've got the Rogue Investigator, Alessandra Zorzi, the Countess. She's got 3/4/2/4, and she gets to take an additional action each turn as long as that action is a parlay action. So given that we are going to have, we're going to be dealing with a lot of residents in the Feast of Hemlock Vale campaign expansion, I'm sure Alessandra will be busy. We have Hank Sampson, who has 3 willpower, 1 intellect, 5 combat, and 3 agility. We're going to talk about him in the next video, but his basic ability is that he has 2 bonded versions of himself. So when he goes down the first time, because he only has 5 health and 5 sanity, you get to replace him with one of his bonded versions and keep playing the game. Unfortunately, those bonded versions can't be healed, so you need to be careful to manage Hank's health. Now, we didn't know basically anything about Kohaku Narakami, the folklorist who's the mystic investigator, other than that he has 4 willpower, 4 intellect, 3 combat, and 1 agility. However, Dai from the Drawn to the Flame patron server provided a translation of Kohaku's Investigator card, which appears over at the Asmodee Germany pre-order page. And his ability has to do with Bless and Curse tokens. At the beginning of your turn, you get to add 1 Bless or 1 Curse token to the Chaos bag, depending on which token there is fewer of in the bag. If there's a draw, you get to choose. Or you can remove 2 Bless and Curse tokens from the Chaos bag to take an additional action this turn. So Kohaku is going all in on the Bless and Curse mechanic, which we already knew the designers were going to take a second pass at in this expansion. Kohaku's Elder Sign ability appears to be +2, and he gets to add 1 Bless and 1 Curse token to the Chaos bag. That's my rough translation of what happens there. That may be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that's what he gets to do. And Kohaku has 6 health and 8 sanity. So at this point, we know pretty much what all of the investigators do. We unfortunately, we do not know what their deck building options are. So that will be, I assume, revealed at a later date. So now that we're all caught up on who the investigators are and what their abilities are, let's dive into Kate Winthrop, the scientist. Kate Winthrop has 2 willpower, 4 intellect, 2 combat, and 4 agility. She is the scientist. She has the Miskatonic and Scholar trait. You begin the game with the FLUX stabilizer in active side face up. As a free triggered ability, move 1 clue from Kate Winthrop to a science or tool asset you control with no clues on it. She has the forced effect: when an asset you control with a clue on it leaves play, place its clue on your location. And as an Elder Sign effect, she gets +0. You may move 1 clue from an asset you control back to Kate Winthrop. She has 6 health and 8 sanity. Now, Kate Winthrop is one of only 2 Seekers with 4 agility, the other being Ursula Downs from the Forgotten Age. So it makes sense that Kate will be leaning heavily into evasion as her primary way of dealing with enemies, especially in the solo format, if she doesn't have a partner to protect her. Her signature asset, the FLUX stabilizer, which we'll take a look in a moment, begins the game in play, and it is pretty important to Kate's gameplay loop. To summarize it quickly, basically Kate will A, discover clues, B, move those clues to the FLUX stabilizer, which will then enable her to move clues to her other science and tool assets. Then she has a card that is bonded to the FLUX stabilizer, AETHERIC Current, which once you play it will move the clues back from those assets to Kate, so she can move those clues again. And the benefit of moving clues to science and clue assets include gaining skill bonuses. So Kate will discover all the clues, move them around for skill bonuses, and then presumably move them back to her so she can repeat the cycle. It's worth noting that moving a clue to a science or tool asset that Kate controls is a free triggered ability that has no limit, so you can use it during any player window, during any phase. So Mythos, etc. You can also use it during skill tests, so you could move a clue from Kate to one of her science or tool assets to gain a skill bonus when you hit a test, which is very helpful. However, science or tool assets that Kate controls may only have 1 clue, so Kate is definitely incentivized to have as many science or tool assets as she can on the table. Fortunately, the designers did spoil a card that we will look at in a moment that gives her an additional hand slot for tool assets, so between that and her accessory slot, which is also receiving a science asset, she could have, say, 3 hand slots filled with science and tool assets and her accessory slot. And who knows, maybe we'll get some science assets that can go in our arcane slots too. So Kate will be able to play around with a lot of clues during the game. Now, one issue that has cropped up since Kate Winthrop was spoiled last week is how she can go about spending clues. Now, the rules on page 6 and 7 of the rules reference make it pretty clear that clues are placed on investigator cards, and that when you want to advance the act deck, investigators may spend clues from their investigator cards. It doesn't make any mention of clues that are on other cards in play. Now, I was unable to find any information in the Learn to Play guide, the rules reference, or the FAQ that indicated Kate could spend clues that she had moved to her assets, which got me thinking, well, Kate's going to need to move those clues back to her before she's able to spend those clues, which makes her a little more challenging to play than if she can just spend clues that she moves to her assets. Because A, she'd have to move those clues, then find a way to move them back before you can advance the act. And in some scenarios, there aren't a lot of extra clues to go around. For example, in the Gathering, there are 2 clues on the study, and you need 2 clues per investigator to advance. So if Kate moved a clue to her FLUX stabilizer, she wouldn't get out of the study, which seemed overly restrictive, but the rules didn't seem to permit her to spend clues that were on her assets. Now, designer Duke Harris has confirmed on various Discord servers that Kate may spend clues on her assets, not just her investigator card, which obviously makes her a lot easier to play. And so I assume that the FAQ will be updated at some point to clarify that Kate can in fact spend clues on her on other assets she controls, because I searched high and low through all of the rules documents that I had at my disposal and was unable to find any reference to investigators controlling the clues on their assets. So I have no doubt that Duke is correct. He is the designer after all, but it would be nice to see a FAQ entry that clarifies that, just in case other players stumble into page 6 and 7 of the rules reference and find out or believe that clues may only be spent if they're on the investigator card. I know I'm not the only one who made this mistake. I was looking at some of the other posts on Discord servers, and there did seem to be some confusion about that. So just to make everything clear, Kate may spend the clues that she moves to her assets, so she's not quite as restrictive as she seems at first. So that is good news for Kate. It will make her much easier to play in solo and or multiplayer, depending on your preference. Let's take a look at the FLUX Stabilizer. The FLUX Stabilizer is a card with a double-sided card. It has an inactive side and an active side. It starts the game in play. It has the item, tool, and science traits. It's a permanent Kate Winthrop deck only, so it's crypt chill proof. The inactive side of the FLUX Stabilizer has a forced effect. After a clue is placed on FLUX Stabilizer, search your bonded cards or discard pile for one copy of Aetheric Current and shuffle it into your deck. Flip FLUX Stabilizer, keeping all tokens and attachments. So once you flip the FLUX Stabilizer to its active side, it has same traits, permanent, Kate Winthrop deck only, item, tool, and science trait. As a response, when you place a clue on an asset you control, get +2 skill value for your next skill test this phase. So flipping the FLUX Stabilizer should be Kate's top priority, because it does allow her to benefit from placing clues on other science and tool assets that she controls. For example, if Kate were to draw a Rotting Remains during the Mythos phase, and she has a clue on her investigator card, she could use the free triggered ability on her card to move that clue during either player window during the subsequent skill test to boost her willpower to 4, which would be very helpful. Again, remember that each science and tool asset can only have one clue, so that Kate will need to have a lot of assets with those traits in order to pull off that trick repeatedly. Draw a lot of Elder Signs to move those clues back to her, or play Etheric Current, which will move all clues on assets back to Kate. It's also worth noting that there is no limit on that free triggered ability. So say if you had multiple science or tool assets that didn't have clues on them, I think you could probably do it more than once to boost her skill higher. So if she has 2 willpower and you were able to move 2 clues to 2 different science or tool assets, you could boost her to a +6, which is very helpful in those if you are in dire need of passing a skill test. Now, it also appears that the FLUX Stabilizer does not flip to its inactive side if you happen to spend the clue on it or pull the clue back. Say if you draw an Elder Sign, which is nice. The only way you can flip the FLUX Stabilizer back to its inactive side is playing Aetheric Current, which we will look at now. There are at least 2 versions of Aetheric Current that were spoiled last week during the live stream. Aetheric Current Yugoth and Aetheric Current Yoth, both with different abilities. Now, while the preview article and the live stream gave 2 examples of Aetheric Current, that doesn't rule out that there may be other versions available. We will just have to wait and see come release whether Kate has more of these. Aetheric Current Yugoth is a free event with 1 combat skill icon and the science trait. It is bonded to the FLUX Stabilizer, and you play it only if FLUX Stabilizer is on its active side. So again, Kate is incentivized to keep the FLUX Stabilizer flipped on its active side as much as possible. You may fight, move all clues on assets you control to Kate Winthrop. That includes the FLUX Stabilizer. For this attack, you may use Intellect instead of Combat. If you succeed and the attacked enemy is non-elite, you may exhaust it and move it to any location. Draw 1 card, flip FLUX Stabilizer, keeping all tokens and attachments. So this gives Kate a way to deal with enemies using her intellect instead of her combat. So you're using a 4 versus a 2, which is very nice. Now, Etheric Current Yugoth doesn't do nearly as much damage as some of the other Seeker events out there. I'm thinking of I've Got a Plan in particular. It only does 1 damage. However, if the attack succeeds, the attacked enemy is non-elite, you can exhaust it and move it to any location. So if you are playing on a very large map, moving that non-elite enemy to a location far, far away is probably just as good as killing it, as long as it doesn't have the hunter trait, in which case it will track you down. If you're playing on a smaller map where you don't have a lot of locations to choose from, then this may not be quite as good. But even I'm thinking of a scenario like the Devourer below, which starts with 5 locations in play. If you happen to draw an enemy and Etheric Current and you send that non-elite enemy away to another location, as long as it doesn't hunt, it's probably as good as gone for the rest of the game. So Etheric Current doesn't do much damage. You're not going to be able to kill very much with it. Maybe a rat's here and there, but 1 damage, not going to take out anything of consequence. But you can also move it to any location. So hopefully you don't have to go back there. And of course you also get rewarded by drawing a card and flipping the Flux Stabilizer, so then you can move another clue and get Flux Stabilizer back to its active side. Etheric Current Yoth is a free event with an agility skill icon in the science trait. It is bonded to the Flux Stabilizer, and you can play it only if Flux Stabilizer is on its active side. It has an evade action. Move all clues on assets you control to Kate Winthrop. For this evasion attempt, you may use intellect instead of agility. If you succeed and the target of this evasion is non-elite, shuffle it into the encounter deck. Draw 1 card and flip the Flux Stabilizer, keeping all tokens and attachments. Much like its Yugoth counterpart, Etheric Current Yoth enables Kate to use her intellect instead of her agility. Not a great gain there, considering she has 4 intellect and 4 agility. So depending on your static skill boosts or what skill cards you have in your hand, you may want to use either or. If the target is elite, you're just going to evade it. However, if it is non-elite, you get to shuffle it into the encounter deck. Now, if you're playing in multiplayer, shuffling an enemy into the encounter deck will deal with it temporarily, but if you're playing 4-player, you're going to be drawing through the encounter deck pretty quickly, so that enemy is going to reappear much sooner than later. If you're playing in solo, however, there is a pretty good chance that you will not see that enemy again for the rest of the game. Most encounter decks have 30 plus cards in them. Most solo games only last 12, 13, 14 turns. So you're only going to be drawing through maybe a third of the encounter deck, third to a half of the encounter deck. So if you do shuffle an enemy away, there is a good chance you won't see it again. So that's pretty useful. And of course, you do get to draw 1 card and flip the Flux Stabilizer back to its active side. So basically, playing either version of Etheric Current is Kate's way of moving those clues from her assets back to her Investigator card, flipping the Flux Stabilizer back to its inactive side, I should say, and then Kate can move a clue to it, flipping the Flux Stabilizer back, which will enable her to move clues to her science and tool assets, and then gaining skill bonuses. So there is a nice little gameplay loop built into Kate's play, which should be pretty interesting for players to work with. Now, unlike some of the versions of bonded cards that we have seen in the past, Etheric Current is placed in the discard pile after you play it. It is not to remove from play. And so when you flip the Flux Stabilizer, you can fetch either version of Etheric Current, either from the bonded area or the discard pile, and then shuffle it back into your deck. Kate's signature weakness is Failed Experiment. It has the Blunder trait. Revelation test 3 willpower. This test gets +1 difficulty for each asset you control with a clue on it. For each point you fail by, you must either take 1 horror or place 1 of your clues on your location. And the flavor text is, I have made a huge mistake. Kate will likely face at least a willpower 4 skill test, if not higher, assuming the flux stabilizer has 1 clue on it, or if you have other science and tool assets with clues on it, this could go to 5 or even 6, depending how your board state looks, which puts Kate in a pretty bad spot for the skill test, given that she only has 2 willpower. Now, failing the skill test does force Kate to either take horror, which she does have 8 sanity, so she has a significant amount of soak, and or drop clues that are on her investigator card or assets. So you get to choose, so you really have choice as to how you mitigate the impact of this signature weakness. So I think as long as Kate has a couple of clues to her name, she should be relatively safe from this. If you were to draw an auto fail and Kate doesn't have any clues, then Kate's going to take 3 horror, which is basically the same as blowing or rotting remains tests. So it's bad, but it's not any worse than blowing rotting remains. But I suspect as the Seeker, Kate will have clues, whether they're on her investigator card or her assets, that she can spend. Now, of course, it's not direct horror, so Kate can use soak to mitigate the impact of this. If failed experiment does force Kate to drop clues, say if she drops 2 clues to prevent taking horror, that's sort of roughly equivalent to the other signature weaknesses that tax investigators 2 actions. I say roughly simply because Seekers do have ways of discovering multiple clues, so dropping multiple clues to failed experiment isn't necessarily going to kill Kate's momentum as long as she has a way to discover those multiple clues. So failed experiment does have the potential to dish out a ton of horror if Kate's not prepared for it, but I think you would have to draw pretty early in the game for it to really hit that hard. If you draw this mid to late game, chances are Kate is set up. She has some clues on her flux stabilizer and or science or tool assets that she controls. And then depending on the board state, you can take horror and or drop clues as necessary to mitigate the effects of this one. As I mentioned at the top of the video, we don't know the deck building options for any of the investigators that have been revealed so far, but it is a good bet that Kate will have access to all of the science cards in the game. Not that that's going to make a huge difference, considering that most of the science cards currently available in the game are Seeker cards already. There are only 2 cards that are not Seeker cards, those being First Aid and First Aid Level 3. Perhaps we will receive other science cards in this particular expansion that are not Seeker cards, in which case Kate will probably have access to them anyway. So Kate has a whole bunch of different options in that have the science traits. She's got alchemical distillation. That's the customizable card that was released in the Scarlet Keys. She's got dissection tools, dream enhancing serum, which can help Kate draw cards very quickly as long as she is playing duplicates, which many players do. There's Empirical Hypothesis, another customizable card from the Scarlet Keys that gives you the option of drawing cards if you hit various triggers. And the level 0 version of that card is very good on its own. There's the first aids, of course, but not entirely sure whether I don't really like First Aid Level 0, so I doubt Kate will play that. Maybe First Aid Level 3 if she needs some healing. She has access to Lab Coat Level 1, which was released in the Scarlet Keys, and that has some synergy with a card we're going to look at in a moment, so that may be a good pickup for her. Of course, we've got the Laboratory Assistant from all the way back in the Dunwich Legacy, which can boost her hand size, which works nicely with the Dream Enhancing Serum. We've got Medical Student from Edge of the Earth, Research Notes, which encourages you to play around with the clue dropping deck. Not entirely sure the whole Research Notes clue dropping deck is going to find a home in Kate, because she is using clues to power her assets. So I don't know if she will be interested in trying to include clue dropping tech in her deck. Of course, we have the Strange Solutions from the Dunwich Legacy Investigator expansion, and I'm not sure whether Kate will want those either, considering there is another science unidentified asset that will be released in the box that we're going to take a look at. And finally, there is Surgery Kit. So while there are currently a lot of science cards that are available to Kate, I'm not too sure how many of them she will actually want to put in her deck. I think cards like Dream Enhancing Serum and maybe the Lab Assistant and Empirical Hypothesis seem like pretty good calls, but some of the other ones, not so much. Now, the Feast of Hemlock Vale Investigator expansion is also focused on cards with the Tool trait, and Kate can move clues to tools in order to boost her skill values. There are a whole bunch of tools currently available, and I'm sure that we will receive many more in the Investigator expansion. Not too sure how many of them Kate will be able to use, but I went and looked through the list. We've got Chainsaw 4. That seems unlikely that Kate will be wielding a chainsaw. There's a Cryptographic Cipher, Dissection Tools, Fingerprint Kit, level 0 and level 4. All of those seem like they could find a home in a Kate deck if she's looking to discover clues, especially with the Cryptographic Cipher and the Fingerprint Kits. Fire Extinguisher is a tool, but I don't really see Kate playing that. Although it does, Fire Extinguisher level 3 does help you evade enemies, which Kate might like. We've got both levels of Flashlight. Kate may like the level 3 upgrade though for Flashlight, since it does help with evasions as well, which I think Kate will be leaning into. Kate can also take both versions of Lockpicks, which are an interesting choice for her considering she has 4 intellect and 4 agility, so she's sitting at an 8 before the pull with those. So those are awfully nice. They do have the tool trait, so of course Kate can move clues to them to boost her skill values. We've got, of course, the Magnifying Glass from the core set and its upgrade. There's Mariner Compass and the old key rings. The Pocket Multi-Tool, the Pocket Telescope, Quick Draw Holster 4. I doubt Kate will have access to that. Kate's not going to be using guns, so the Quick Draw Holster is not going to be of much interest to her. Riot Whistle, same thing. There's both versions of Sledgehammer. Again, highly unlikely that Kate's going to be using melee weapons given her 2 combat. And then we've got the Surgical Kit, which is also a science trait, and the Thieves Kit, which was released in, I believe, the Scarlet Keys. Given that Kate has 4 intellect and access to all of the Seeker goodies, I don't expect her to find much value in the Thieves Kit, but hey, you never know. Once we see Kate's deck building options, Kate's deck composition will become much more clear, and we'll be able to narrow down the list of science and tool assets that Kate is interested in playing. And of course, there may be cards in the that haven't been revealed in this expansion that Kate is much more interested in. Designer Duke Harris and the Fantasy Flight Games preview article about the Feast of Hemlock Vale Investigator expansion spoiled several player cards, a handful of Seeker cards, and a handful of Survivor cards that we will look at in the Hank Sampson video. Let's take a look at those Seeker cards now. The first is Microscope. It's a 2-cost asset with an intellect, skill icon, item, tool, and science trait. As a response, after an enemy at your location is successfully evaded or defeated, exhaust Microscope. Place 1 resource on Microscope as evidence. You may take 2 actions to investigate. You get +1 intellect for this investigation for each evidence on Microscope to a maximum of +3. If you succeed, you may spend up to 2 evidence to discover that many additional clues at your location, and Microscope takes up a hand slot. So one of the nice things about Microscope is that you may trigger the reaction after any investigator successfully defeats or evades an enemy at your location. That is helpful in multiplayer, so Kate doesn't have to do it all herself to load up the Microscope with evidence. Kate, of course, has 4 agility, so evasion will likely be her go-to for enemy management, especially in solo. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the microscope. The fact that you need to defeat / evade enemies before you can use the microscope effectively means that it is going to be slow, especially in solo. When you're playing multiplayer, you're drawing so many encounter cards that enemies tend to hit the table pretty early in the game. That's not necessarily the case in solo. Sometimes you can hit runs where you're just drawing treacheries. So if you don't draw the enemies you need, it's going to take you time to power up the microscope. And I'm not a huge fan of cards that take time to power up before they actually do anything. The double investigate action is also somewhat problematic in solo, simply because most locations in solo only have 1 or 2 clues. So you're not necessarily going to need something like the microscope to help you clear those locations. Now in multiplayer, locations can have anywhere from 4 to 8 plus clues on them. So the ability to grab multiple clues is always handy. The microscope is less problematic in multiplayer, although I can't imagine spending anything less than 2 evidence each time you use it. If you're taking a double investigate action, you are getting the bonus, but you're only getting 1 clue. So you'd need to spend at least 1 evidence to get 2 clues. So you're getting, you're taking 2 actions worth of effort to get 2 clues. And you'd probably want to spend 2 evidence, so you're spending 2 actions to get those 3 clues. If you're not doing that, then I'm not sure why you're using the microscope. Personally, I just feel like there's a lot easier ways for seekers to grab multiple clues and get skill bonuses to investigate tests rather than having to evade and or defeat a whole bunch of enemies first. Of course, once you start using the microscope to discover extra clues, you're going to need to keep piling on the evidence, which sort of necessitates Kate doing a lot of evading on her own or sticking close to the investigator responsible for enemy management to keep adding those tokens. So not only is it a little slow to get off the crown, but then you've got to sort of keep Kate in the right position to keep the evidence flowing. So not a huge fan. Now maybe this could see play on higher difficulty levels. Taking 1 test to get 3 clues is better than taking 3 tests to get clues, especially when you're drawing potentially very negative tokens from the bag. Still not certain whether +3 would be enough on expert, though, considering you've got -8s in the bag at that point. But it might be enough to warrant putting the microscope in a deck if you're playing on higher levels of difficulty, just to be able to sort of compress those actions, take less tests and get bigger bonuses to that test to make sure that you succeed. Unfortunately, I just don't see myself playing microscope in solo. If I want extra clues, I can just play deduction or some of the other ways of getting them, like working a hunch and stuff like that. So the microscope does have the science trait. We'll have to see how many assets with the science trait exist for Kate to choose from, but right now I don't think I will be picking this one. The next card is Chemistry Set. It is a 2-cost asset with an intellect skill icon, item tool, and science traits. You may take an action and exhaust the chemistry set to investigate. If you fail by exactly 2, you discard chemistry set. If you succeed by exactly 0, you gain 2 resources. If you succeed by exactly 2, you draw 1 card. And if you succeed by exactly 4, you discover 1 additional clue at your location, and the chemistry set takes up an accessory slot. Now, I have to admit the accessory slot is a little strange. It is a very large chemistry set after all, and the accessory slot is usually reserved for pendants and such and stuff like that. However, it is understandable if they need a science asset for the accessory slot that Kate can use. Now, succeeding or failing by exactly X seems to be a bit of a theme in this set. There is another card that we'll look at in a moment that has a similar wording. The word exactly appears on exactly 9 cards currently, none of which are relevant to this discussion. So succeeding by exactly a number is a new mechanic. The chemistry set does synergize with Lab Coat, level 1 from the Scarlet Keys Investigator expansion. Just a quick reminder of what that does. It's a 2-cost asset, item, clothing, and science trait, and as a reaction, when you would fail a skill test on a Seeker card by 1 or less, exhaust lab coat, you succeed by 0 instead. It has 1 health, 1 sanity, and takes up a body slot. So basically, if you're using chemistry set and lab coat in conjunction, you would have to fail the skill test on the chemistry set by 1 or less in order to use the lab coat to succeed by 0, at which point you would discover a clue and gain 2 resources. So I'm not entirely sure how often you're going to be triggering that particular combo, but it is nice that you were going to get something on a test that you were probably going to fail. Now, I think chemistry set's viability is going to depend a lot on whether, A, you can find a way to manipulate the chaos bag in order to succeed by exactly 0, or you play it in combination with other cards that require you to succeed by exactly a number, such as Dr. Charles West III, who we will look at in a moment. If you're playing those 2 cards in combination, if you succeed by exactly 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're going to get something. Now, if you don't care what you're going to get some sort of benefit as long as you succeed exactly by 1 to 4. I think the problem arises if you want one of these particular effects. For example, a lot of Seekers want to discover additional clues, so they are going to want to succeed by exactly 4. Gaining resources and drawing cards are nice, but there are other ways to do that. So if you're trying to succeed by exactly 4, if you're playing Kate has 4 intellect. If she's at a 3-shard location, she's going to need a 7 to succeed by exactly 4. So barring static skill bonuses from an ally like Dr. Mylan Christopher, Kate is likely going to need to spend resources on talents or similar cards, or she's going to need to commit skill cards and then hope to draw a token with a value of 0 in order to succeed by 4. And if you do all that, committing all those cards and resources, etc., and then you don't succeed by exactly 4, that's not going to feel particularly good. So I am going to reserve judgment on the chemistry set for the time being. It may have value if you're playing it in combination with Charles West III, so regardless of how much you succeed by, as long as it's between 1 and 4, you're going to get some sort of benefit out of it. It is, again, another science asset for Kate. That this one goes in the accessory slot. I don't know how many of those that she will have access to, so if you really want to take advantage of her ability to move clues around, she may be sort of pushed into playing the chemistry set, whether you want to or not. But it would be nice to see some sort of tech that enables you to manipulate the chaos bag to make succeeding by exactly a number a little more reliable. If not, then I'm not too sure how much value this will have, especially outside of a Kate Winthrop deck. The next card that I mentioned earlier is Dr. Charles West III. Knows his purpose. He's a 3-cost asset with an intellect and combat skill icon, ally, and science trait. You have 1 additional hand slot, which can only be used to hold a tool asset. And as a reaction, after you successfully investigate by exactly 1 or 3, exhaust Dr. Charles West III to deal 1 damage to an enemy at your location. He has 1 health and 2 sanity. Now, additional hand slots are difficult to come by. For investigators, there aren't that many cards that provide hand slots, unless, of course, you're playing a Mystic and have ways of converting arcane slots to hand slots and vice versa. So the ability to get an extra hand slot, even if it can only hold a tool asset, is worth considering. It is nice that Charles West's reaction can deal damage to any enemy at your location, so you can ping aloof enemies or enemies that are engaged with other investigators. Again, much like the chemistry set, Dr. Charles West's viability is going to depend a lot on whether there are either ways to manipulate what you pull from the chaos bag, or you're playing it in combination with the chemistry set. So as long as you succeed by 0 to 4, you're going to be getting some benefit, regardless what you pull from the Chaos bag. The issue, of course, with Dr. Charles West is there may not be an enemy at your location to ping with the damage. So if you're not playing Dr. Charles West in combination with the chemistry set, triggering his reaction isn't necessarily a reliable way of dealing damage. And of course, if you don't have a way of manipulating the Chaos bag, it's going to be tricky to succeed by exactly 1 or 3. I tend to like to commit to a skill test until I'm 2 up, which of course doesn't work with Dr. Charles West, so I'd have to either undercommit to the test, in which case I might fail the test outright, or overcommit to the test, which I don't really like doing because I want to conserve those resources. So some interesting decision points to work through there. Of course, Dr. Charles West does have a strike against him in that he doesn't provide a static skill bonus, which are very popular on allies. He is competing with allies like Dr. Mylan Christopher, who provides +1 intellect as well as resource generation. So he's not going to be a go-to ally for a lot of investigators unless they need that tool asset slot. The other issue with Dr. Charles West is that he only has one health. So if you are playing scenarios that have a lot of ally hate, Dr. Charles West is very fragile and is not going to be on the table for very long unless you're able to protect him. Again, this guy's a little bit hard to judge. If you're playing him in combination with the chemistry set, there might be something to work with there. Obviously, the tool asset slot is nice for somebody like Kate, who's probably going to have her hands full and wants to play a lot of science and tool assets. But there are an awful lot of very good Seeker allies out there, and we'll just have to wait and see whether this guy can find a place in decks. After taking a break during the Scarlet Keys Investigator expansion, the unidentified assets are back. This is the Ravenous MYCONID. It is unidentified. It has an agility skill icon, creature, monster, flora, and science trait. Limit 1 per deck. As an action, search your bonded cards for uncanny growth and add it to your hand. As an action, you may, if the Ravenous MYCONID has 3 or more growth on it, move each growth to your resource pool as a resource. Record in your campaign log that you have classified a new species, and the Ravenous MYCONID has 1 health and 1 sanity. So the Ravenous MYCONID is bonded to Uncanny Growth, which is a 1-cost event with the Insight and Science trait. Bonded to the Ravenous MYCONID. Investigate. After this test resolves, place 1 resource on Ravenous MYCONID as growth for each point you succeed by. Set Uncanny Growth aside out of play. If you fail, return Uncanny Growth to your hand. So the nice thing about the Ravenous MYCONID is that it is slotless, so you have a little bit of soak that doesn't take up a hand slot, any of your slots. It is going to take at least 5 actions to classify a new species, which is quite a few compared to unidentified assets like the Strange Solution. The Strange Solution just requires you to take 1 skill test and bang, you've identified it. This one's going to take you 5 actions. You've got to first play the Ravenous MYCONID, then you've got to take an action to search your bonded cards for Uncanny Growth, then you've got to take an action to play the Uncanny Growth, assuming, of course, that you can succeed by at least 3 and place 3 growth tokens on the MYCONID in one go. If you blow that skill test or don't succeed by 3, then you're going to have to, worst case, take another action to go get Uncanny Growth and then play it again, which is going to take you 2 more actions. So I think in this case, you're probably better off to fail the test outright, because at least that way Uncanny Growth goes back to your hand. You're not forced to, say, if you succeed by 1, Uncanny Growth gets set aside, and then you have to go get it again to get the other 2 growth tokens. And then, of course, you have to take the final action to classify the new species. So identifying the Ravenous MYCONID is going to be a pretty labor-intensive activity. I'll have to wait and see whether I have the actions to spare in solo to get this done. Of course, the Ravenous MYCONID does give you some resources and soak if you happen to identify it. It is kind of fragile, though. It only has 1 health and 1 sanity, so if you are facing a scenario with ally hate, you need to be a little bit careful when the Ravenous MYCONID hits the table, because if it gets pinged for a damage or horror, it's gone, and that could happen before you have identified it. Worst case, you search your bonded cards for Uncanny Growth, play the Uncanny Growth, get all the tokens on the MYCONID, and then the MYCONID gets killed before you can take the final action to identify it. But I don't suspect that's going to happen often, but it's going to happen to somebody. So I feel your pain. Of course, the Ravenous MYCONID's value is going to depend almost entirely on its upgrade and or upgrades. Designer Duke Harris has already confirmed that it will be receiving upgrades in this expansion. So we will have to wait and see what those have in store for, and see whether the Ravenous MYCONID is worth those 5 actions to identify. The final secret card that we're going to look at in this video is probably the easiest one to judge. This is Well Funded. It is a skill with 1 wild skill icon on the fortune trait. While you control a science or tool asset, Well Funded gains a wild skill icon. While you control 3 or more science and or tool assets, Well Funded gains 2 wild skill icons instead. And its game text is every cent of that research grant counts. So Kate has her Flux Stabilizer from the word go, so at the very least this is Unexpected 3 or 4 in her deck, or you can just replace Unexpected Courage with it. Wild skill icons are great, of course. Kate will need them to pass willpower skill tests in particular, so having basically 2 wild skill icons as soon as you start the game with Well Funded is very nice indeed. While we don't know Kate's deck building options, more than likely she is going to be playing a lot of science and tool assets. So more often than not, this is going to have 3 wild skill icons most of the time, which basically makes it an auto include in Kate's deck. There aren't that many level 0 cards that give you 3 wild skill icons, and so this one is pretty much a no-brainer. Other investigators who might like this card include Wilson Richards, the Guardian investigator in the box who plays around a lot with tools. He would very much like to have 3 wild skill icons. The only question is whether his deck building options will allow him to include this card in his deck. Daryl Simmons from the Scarlet Keys begins the game with Daryl's Kodak in play, which is a tool. So this is probably going in Daryl's deck as well. The other investigator who might like this is Joe Diamond, who has a penchant for tool assets thanks to his signature asset, Detective's Colt 1911s. Of course, if you are building a Seeker or off-class Seeker that is playing a lot of science and or tool assets, Well Funded is definitely a card that you should consider. The only investigator who can take it, of course, is Rex Murphy, because Well Funded has the fortune trait. I like skills. I love playing Unexpected Courage, so having more copies of Unexpected Courage in my deck is always good. So pretty good chance this one will be making the cut in at least Kate Winthrop, as well as Wilson Richards, Daryl Simmons, and other investigators, as long as you've got the science or tool assets to support it. That's going to do it for my look at Kate Winthrop and the Seeker cards that were spoiled in the Fantasy Flight Games preview article for the Feast of Hemlock Vale. Overall, I'm looking forward to giving Kate a try, since designer Duke Harris has confirmed that Kate can spend clues that she moves to her assets. She's going to be a lot easier to play. She can discover clues and immediately begin moving those clues to her assets. Her top priority will be flipping the Flux Stabilizer and then getting more science and tool assets on the table so she can move clues to them in order to generate +2 on skill tests during the phase. It's very nice that she can use that during any phase, so if she gets tagged with a bad treachery during the Mythos phase, As long as she's got a clue and an empty science or tool asset, she can get a +2 skill bonus. Then of course you're going to be looking for your etheric current to move those clues back to Kate so you can rinse and repeat the process. So I think players are going to have a lot of fun with Kate's playstyle and using clues as resources. She's the first investigator who really does that, and I think that the designers have created an interesting gameplay loop that will give players something to chew on as they work through the scenario. I think Kate is going to create a lot of interesting decision points for players during scenarios, and that is the hallmark of a great investigator. As for all of the Seeker cards, some of them are harder to judge than others. Well-funded seems like an obvious inclusion in Kate, as well as any other deck using a lot of science and tool assets. I'm not a huge fan of the microscope. You have to go through a lot of extra work to stack evidence on it, and frankly, I think there are easier ways to discover additional clues. A couple copies of deduction go a long way towards that. But Seekers have other ways of discovering clues, such as working a hunch that don't take actions either. So maybe the microscope will find a place in a multiplayer Kate deck, but I'm probably not going to touch it in solo. The only reason right now that I could see myself playing it is that there simply aren't enough science assets, science and or tool assets to go around. But I suspect once this expansion drops, there'll be plenty for Kate to choose from. And frankly, the microscope just takes too much work. We don't really know much about the Ravenous MYCONID, other than that it gets you some resources and soak. We'll have to wait and see what the upgrades do for that. And then, of course, the chemistry set and Charles West III seem like they were destined to be played together. If you do, and you succeed by at least 1 to 4, you're going to get some little benefit out of it. It will be interesting to see whether there is some way that you can manipulate the chaos bag to sort of fine-tune whether you can succeed exactly by something, because I think a lot of players are going to look at that succeed by exactly 4 to get an additional clue, and they're going to want to get that. But if you're just sort of stacking bonuses and then hoping for the best, that's not going to feel great if you fail. So we'll have to wait and see whether there is any bonus. There is any way to manipulate the tokens that can make succeeding exactly a little easier. I will be back shortly with my look at the Survivor Investigator in the box, Hank Sampson, as well as the Survivor cards that were spoiled. I hope you'll stay tuned for that. And of course, if you enjoy this type of comment, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, I hope that you have a great day. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.